Hello, everybody. This is Project Alpha and War Diary with Alexei Arestovych live. Hello, Alexei. Good evening, everybody. I have a question. Let's start rather fast. You promised that you would not be scaring anybody, but I'm reading news that happened last week, and I'm thinking they're doing pretty well without you in that area. Well, I refuse to continue scaring people, Nikolay, because our partners and our allies and government scare our citizens much better than I do. So I'm not supporting that vector. Yeah, I'm reading news here. Italy says they have 63 missiles left. Leopards are good only for parades and for nothing else. And then United States are saying that their missile park is catastrophically outdated. Yeah, Brits sent us 200 MRAMs, so yeah, we can shoot Shahids down. We get sent 200 Shahids at us per week, so very soon we'll run out of it. Yeah, seems like the West is absolutely not ready for this war. There is a movie that many people watched, 17 Moments of Spring. There is a foretelling moment there when a German general is riding a train and he's telling his acquaintance that he's been fighting with Americans for over a year, and their equipment will be the end of them. And today's news that 400 ICBMs Minuteman III are not to be upgraded and have to be removed from arsenal, and they're 6 generations behind the current technology. So that's a serious chunk of American nuclear arsenal, and this is a sign that the bet on high-tech equipment might eat them alive as rust, and they might drown in their own technical superiority. They were going to lead small high-tech wars where one Taliban fighter is being viewed by 15 satellites. Several bombers are working on him, and 40 special services teams are working on them. And there are some smart missiles and bombs being dropped on their heads. But still, they were more Talibs than all that equipment could provide firepower against. And when we're talking about the big war, when you have to use a missile to shoot down the enemy's ballistic missile or something, and that defense missile costs you 2 to 6 millions, this is a bad story. And yeah, we're being told that look how Wagner was being defeated over there, how other enemy was destroyed here. But guys, don't mix small operations with big heroic wars, because what may happen, you will heroically shoot all your tomahawks at the enemy, and you will cause a lot of destruction. But then if the war lasts for more than 3 months, then you will have to fight with your infantry, because you will be running out of all that high-tech stuff. And the infantry, what is it? That's a whole other story. That's shooting from rifles from a grenade throwing range and throwing grenades at each other. And then who will have more battle-worthy infantry? Russia, China, and Iran, and North Korea taken together, or Britain, which now have to disband the crews of the old Navy ships to then collect these crews, the same people, to new ships. The news of 2024. Britain cannot conscript enough Navy personnel for the new ships. Britain, the second name of Britain is warships, is Navy. There is no Navy, there is no Britain, right? If there are new Falkland Island issues, they will have nothing to fight for them with. And the new Argentine leader already made their claims against them. So perhaps he knows, Alexei, that they're getting weaker. Well, it's kind of like Crimea there. This is a sore point for Argentina, so many politicians use that statement, and I think it could be just that. But Argentina themselves, they're also not too good in the military department. They might not have enough equipment to fight for that as well. So it might be another war of one-handed with one-legged. So at the beginning of these major war actions, people were laughing at the Russian nuclear arsenal, that it's very old and it's unclear if it can even take wing and lift off. But still, Russia is placing some nukes in Belarus, and there is not enough data to say that this is complete bluff from the side of Putin. And at the same time, United States acknowledged that their arsenal is too expensive to upgrade, so they'll probably have to just replace it. And does it not bring United States to the problem when they will have nothing to retaliate with if there is a large-scale conflict? This publication does not refer the sources, does not give you a way to check their data, but still. Well, right, to some degree, this is a budget conversation. Military in the United States know how to properly beg for money. But the problem is not just that. The problem is that I think their anthropotype changed here. They're not ready for military production and not ready for war. They're not ready to sacrifice themselves for that. And even if they had a perfect nuclear arsenal right now and a ton of different munitions, and they actually do have a lot of military equipment, they're a very strong country. I don't see them having enough people to use all that in a long, bloody war. They can probably do a police operation from air, but their ability to deal with Iran causes a lot of pause and consideration. Because Iran is mostly in mountains, it's not so easy to bomb them, and Iran has means to respond to any attack. And after 40 years of sanctions, they have almost complete military production cycle, and they have tools to answer if they're attacked. So I think this is a change of an anthropotype. They have issues recruiting soldiers for the service, and those who come very often physically are not fit, so it takes a bit to work them into the system. In Britain, they cannot get enough people for Navy, and in Germany, 40% of Germans, to the question, will you be defending Germany, said no, categorically, so 40%. These are the people whose fathers could still fight in Vietnam back in the day, right? Suffer significant losses, about 1,000 troops per month, dozens of jets per month, and they were still fighting. They were still fighting, but I don't see them being capable of conducting the same war or having the will to do that right now. And their grandfathers were a different breed. They were the ones who were landing on the Omaha beaches and the like, and Iwo Jima, and facing the machine guns and were going forward and achieving the goals. So in order to win the global conflict between the global West and the global South, the West needs to psychologically change. And the answer would be, what for? Because what's the goal of the West today? Schwab and his inclusive capitalism? When we have among our listeners some layers of society who are more active and closer to war. We have military people, we have active members of society who have family members and who have some patriotic colors, right? When you start talking to them one-on-one here in Ukraine, to our patriots, Ukraine above all and all, they, even the most thinking among them, start saying that the West is just asleep. One day, the West will be really teased enough and they will awaken. So I have a question. When it awakens, shall we still be alive, and in what capacity as a country? And the second, are you sure when the West awakens, it will have Ukrainian interests on its mind? Where are you taking these ideas from? So this is an interesting story, and it's a repetitive Ukrainian story that Gogol described back in his classic books. I'm asking a question. So, son, did your Poles help you? Speaking of Poles, I understand the blockade is over, Alexei, right? And there are news coming out that still embargo for Ukrainian product export will be working without time limits. And that's a new government, right? So Poland and the government that are actually our friends, we can understand them in regards to goods that we're selling, exporting, because one thing is to allow Ukraine to export it to the world at large, and the other thing is to allow Ukraine to supplement and substitute your own producers, and that's a different one. So we can understand them. But the other question is, when we are fighting for survival with Russia, and when experts are starting to say that until the bigger war with Europe and Russia, there are only 3 years left, is it a good time to behave like this? And this is the situation with the West when people like Poles, who understand us rather well, who have been occupied by Russia before, and they still do not want to refuse from the market laws in favor of survival laws. And on the words, yeah, they can give you an oath that they'll be fighting and stopping Russia. But as we get to the actual war and actual fighting, the market laws prevail. Same thing in the United States. They could be producing 1,000 Patriot missiles a year easily, but the laws of market economy do not allow to do that. Or maybe they don't have production because there is another reason to not doing it, because when the war is over, where do you put the people that work there? How do you what do you do with that factory, right? So all these conversations about brotherhood, about the necessity to resist the occupation, this is all great. But the moment when we get to the actual solutions, oh, sorry, we have market laws. That was a similar thing during COVID, when infectionists and infection departments were cut earlier, because we initially had a lot of them, but according to the laws of marketplace, we did not need much of them, and they were cut. So when COVID came over, apparently we were short on these specialists, and it was not seen profitable to have 100, 150 beds waiting for just in case thing like COVID. The only solution I see in such situation is a government system of two contours. One of them is market contour, open, and the other is protected. And I can name some spheres that can be in that protected one: security, internal and external, education, infrastructure, and medicine. These should be, in my view, principally not market areas. Medicine might be partly commercial, but as for education, special services, and military, they should not be on the market. And these are just ways to suicide oneself, and that's what exactly happened with them. They let the market in, and now they're discovering that in order to wage this war against the axis of evil, why do I not like these moral statements, moralizing statements in politics? Because after you make a statement that the axis of evil is destroying a free Ukrainian democracy, then you discover that 70 plus components in Kinjal are Russian missile arm of American components. And so the politicians already announced that there is an axis of evil. They brought enough pathos to their statement, and then we discover that we cannot fight that, right? What do we think of Russia here in Ukraine? Darkness with a big letter D, cannibals. We want to win over them, right? Most Ukrainians will support that, especially after another missile shelling. But why do we keep pumping their gas through our territory? And how are they part of the grain deal with them, right? This is an interest of Ukraine, right? Right, we are fighting with darkness with a capital D, and we're still trading or doing some commercial activity with the country that attacked us to come and destroy everybody alive, right? To occupy and to live in our land. So if you are fighting that war, there probably should not be a grain deal like it is, and gas transit deal. And if you do have these commercial interests and they are still operating, then perhaps you should be telling a different story, that yes, they are our enemies, and you know, we're fighting for certain interests, they're fighting for certain interests, and that's what we're doing now. So all that extra pathos is killing both Ukraine and the West. It was killing Russia too, but after having lost a lot of resources and people here on the front, they're starting to become more sober. And they're ahead of us. I don't know what finish line will they cross, and will they cross the finish line, but they're currently ahead. And we are still talking about the axis of evil, but there'll be no Patriot systems to shoot them down. It's an axis of evil, but we'll still be trading with them. And, right, it's a war for survival, but we're getting money for transit. So there are, Alexei, some signs that some ideas and adequate ideas are still getting attention. And there is a public project Dvizh in Ukraine, a motion in English. And we do speak a lot about 3rd Storm Brigade, and it was initiated by some of the battalion commanders of that brigade. Actually, Nikolay, it's not us talking about them a lot. They speak a lot about themselves, and we do comment their actions. Right, they're some of the examples, right? So there was a dialogue about what does an average Russian fighter have in terms of equipment? Is it true that they're running with rusty rifles and all? And the battalion commanders from the brigade were saying that, no, this is not true. Russian army is already equipped better than Ukrainian. They have federal program to supply themselves. Those programs work better. They have more arms and they have rather good equipment getting to them now. Yeah, I can add here, Nikolay, that they have a better training program. They have a better production program of military equipment and arms and all. And I remember when we have issues with our training, let me remember when, I think it was February of 23, right? Over almost a year ago. You know, when I heard for the first time that Russian paratroopers who were being preparing new recruits from mobilized, and when the recruits failed the examination, right, they get some training and they eventually have to take a final exam, battalion tactical trainings with some shooting. They failed them and they were left to take a second cycle of training. And that's where I understood that we're starting to have serious issues because they're starting to train their people properly. They're starting to provide a better quality training. So, you mean they saturated their front line? Right, exactly. They used half to just plug the glaring holes in their front and then took the other half and started training them proper. That means they have enough resources to do that, they have time to train, and they're sending better troops as a result to the front. And that's generally what happens. Sometimes it fails, but overall, statistically, they're doing like this. And another simple emotional example that most people will understand and remember. Ukrainian dilemma sounds like this, like with any person. The war puts a dilemma in front of you to think or to turn on the emotions, for example, to giggle or to laugh at the enemy. How do our society comments on many videos that we see when Russian troops kill themselves with a rifle or blow themselves up with a grenade? You probably have seen quite a few of those. Well, Alexei, I'm trying not to watch them, these exact videos. Right, well, they exist at plenty, and there's a lot of laughter in the society about them. But I want to say as a professional military that the soldier that ends himself off with a grenade or shoots himself with his weapon when he has no other way out, this is anyone but the dumb orc, because there are nobody forcing him to fight. There's no other troops behind him shooting at him when he makes that decision. He is one-on-one with his life and death situation, and it's difficult to fight with people like that who are convinced like that. When Andrei Beletsky was giving his famous interview to Ukrainian Truth, right, Ukrainian Pravda, a few months ago, he did notice that 31st Storm Brigade, which they fought against near Bakhmut, when he was asked about the quality of Russian fighters, he said that we were amazed that many of Russian soldiers end off their lives instead of surrendering, and it's difficult indeed to fight with them. They are sturdy guys. He noticed that as a factor, and I'm telling you too that this is a factor. When you see an enemy who, instead of surrendering, blows himself up with a grenade, or like our friends from the front are telling that when they come to their trench and they're saying, surrender, and they do not. They shoot back, they do whatever, they don't surrender, so you have to throw a grenade in there. So these are anyone but the dumb orcs. And we have a dilemma to either start thinking, whom do we fight with and what are our perspectives in this case, or to laugh at that. Ukrainians often choose to laugh. And this does not induce, let's put it gently, the growth of our capability. Only sober reaction to reality, only analytics helps us to understand and to grow. So yeah, battalion commanders of 3rd Storm Brigade also saying that do not under-evaluate your enemy. They're a serious enemy, and when we treat them as idiots, we essentially saying that we're also idiots who sometimes lose even to these foes. Well, yeah, one also needs to understand that military also earn their political capital in the war, and when you attack them and saying that, it's not a serious enemy, then they're losing all that political capital and fame capital, and they're getting a bit upset. But in reality, Russian army, however we call it, still have advantage on the most statistics in the war. And now they have qualitative advantages in a few areas as well. Their radio interference system is way better than anything that we have. Their UAV ability to throw at us is much higher than ours. They are better at mobilizing the troops because we have to capture and find people to send to the front, and they actually have people coming to fight for the money, and they go to the war on their own volition. So we're fighting with a strong, serious enemy who are no dummies. They made initially a mistake when they started this program by NATO standards, because when they landed the best of the best, 45th Brigade, Special Brigade, 31st Brigade, all that special services, when they landed in Gostomel Airport, our troops have eliminated them completely, basically fully. 45th Brigade didn't even recover after that on the Russian side. They had severe losses, and it basically is non-existent. And our special services of Ministry of Intel, they basically took them over at the pistol distance, and our people were much better trained at this point. So this war taught them that all these police operations and paratrooper operations are idiocy. I think they overall had 26 of them, and only one was successful. But they learned on this. They did not break. They acknowledged their mistakes, huge losses, and the failure of usage of the whole concept of using troops in wars like NATO does. So when they stopped doing that, when they started fighting like they were initially trained in the Soviet times, that's when we started to have huge problems. And they don't even have enough troops like Soviet Union did. So their pipe is lower and smoke is weaker. But they are getting better, grounded in reality. And I have a question. Are we going to do anything about that? Because we were behind, and we still are behind in the most key questions: military production, the use of our means on the front, the training of our troops, all the major things that play a role. We are now behind them. Right, we are trying to catch up. That's true, Alexei. Well, look, Nikolay, I have a friend, battalion commander. He was at the direction of the main attack of Wagner troops with an infantry battalion. And he personally saw how 7 of those infantrymen blew themselves up with grenades. They had a failed attack, and 7 of them survived, so they withdrew a bit and then blew them up with grenade. And that's when he said he started to have disillusions about that, because I thought, show me some Ukrainian fighters, show me 7 Ukrainians who would be killing themselves with grenades. Well, I would say, Alexei, here that it would be good if they do not get into captivity with Russians, right? True, but again, this is not about us not doing that. This is about them being ready to do that. So don't call them dumb orcs. They are a serious enemy. All right, let me ask you to say a couple more words here. Sorry for interrupting you. What we should have done, besides everything that we've said about military production and the rest, in the terms of bringing our people to reality in terms of ideological matter. And sorry if I'm being a bit too vague. What's the meaning I'm trying to convey? The defeatist moods, right? Many people who listen to us are saying that since you are discussing these bad facts where Russians produce more effective, that means that you are spreading defeatist moods. How do we use that information in order not to propagate defeatist moods, but if we're playing that game, what would be the right way to push and promote the right information? All right, so Nikolay, we don't need to go too far with that. We have Mariana Bezukla, who is a congresswoman, right? She's not Arestovych and Feldman, who are just citizens. She is a congresswoman. She's a member of a committee, a military committee up there. She's bringing these questions into the public space. What did they make out of her? They essentially tried to make out of her some wild freak who is nearly a national traitor. Well, first I would say it's really bad that it's just one person bringing these matters up. Second, that she was trolled that much only indicates that we cannot or do not want to learn from our own mistakes, that we are breaking feedback communications in that patriotic rage in view of that. And it doesn't matter how much the warriors of light are we painting ourselves into. With that quality of feedback, we will have big issues winning this war. So when American army came back from Vietnam around 75, nobody wanted to serve in the army. They were going through a very difficult period in the military. There were students refusing to go. Parents were very much ideologically against their kids going to the army. They took the time to reform it. And in about 10 years, it showed some good results. And the first moment that they used is what they call lesson learning. It took them a big effort to rebuild the mentality of their military, to start acknowledging their mistakes, so they would not be punished and reprimanded for them, but they would be actually rewarded for mentioning the right mistakes that they indeed have had. And in our military, unfortunately, it's working exactly the opposite. The moment you bring any failure, you become national traitor. In Russia, they are criticizing their military. 5 of their generals, of their commanding officers, are in jail under criminal prosecution. How many were demoted and removed from the front? You can watch some of their streams on media. They keep attacking and criticizing their military and their leaders of industrial complex. You can say this is edited and not exactly true. It's more of a fake show. But show me that we have at least a fake show in Ukraine. We have Mariana, who brought up a few questions, and now she's being accused of being some kind of freak. I'm not even talking about myself, right? Until we learn how to learn from the lessons, we will not improve. I want to say here, Alexei, that Mariana called for that fire upon herself by demanding resignation of Zaluzhny. I'm not saying she is 100% correct in everything, but in those areas where she's indicating problems in our military, it should be researched. It should be looked at very thoroughly. And she actually is achieving some results, just at a huge cost to herself. So she did bring attention to the flaws of that mobilization law and the violations of constitution and human rights. And now people are talking and discussing that it needs to be modified, and they're reviewing the edits that will be implemented. Yuriy Butosov is also making a lot of good, positive work. A lot of military officers that come to our streams who are saying that we love our army, but 1, 2, and 3, and that needs to be corrected. And that's it. That's how it should be treated. But the quality of our feedback, of our working feedback, is a non-system scandalized procedure. We often use scandals because we cannot reach ourselves any other way. And then in the next phase, we start screaming, enough of that scandal and hype, let's all unite. And then no unification helps because we are very different, we want different things. And then we go back to the scandal and to the hype. And the society that is rather hysterical, that has a huge degree of pathos in its communications, it devoids itself from a way to find solutions, from learning on their mistakes, and from using feedback to learn. The moment we write down everybody who criticizes into the list of traitors, that's when we basically refuse for any opportunity to learn. All right, let's take a look at mobilization to the end, because there were several publications, including a joint meeting of the Committee of National Congress, Rada, when Minister of Defense participated in that, Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny, and the head of General Command Shaptala. What they were doing, they were looking for ways to make this law better, to enhance it. So from what you know, do you think their efforts were productive or not? I think it is still being discussed. I think it's too early, Nikolay, to discuss the results. Once the results are being published, then we can discuss them. For now, we can discuss the fact that they actually got together to think it over. That's good, because I think that's how it should have been. from the start, because issuing the law in that area would be Cabinet of Ministers, Congress, or dedicated committee of Congress, Zaluzhny, Minister of Defense, and Zaluzhny is coming over and saying that it is the matter of ministers of ministers and Cabinet of Ministers. Military only are responsible for training and preparing these people that were mobilized to fight. Military only take responsibility from the moment when these people come to their military to serve. Everything until then is on the shoulders of the civil administration. And what is tragic is that the situation when people in uniform, in military uniform, are catching people on the street and putting them in the bus and sending them off to the recruitment office. They should not be doing it. Police should not be doing it. It's the right thing that they're dreading that responsibility. According to our law, this is upon the local administration to provide enough people to the draft points so that they could be drafted. It is not on the military. It should not be on the military. It is one of the tragic and most strategic mistakes in this war. Because right now, the person in uniform is being viewed as a threat to the society, when they should be viewed as a defender that everybody praises. And instead, they are afraid of them. They're discussing in city chats that don't go there because the military guys are there. I think the intel officer who suggested that, or whoever that was, if the person was Russian intel officer, they should be awarding him medals for that, because it's a horrible decision. Alexei, do you know perchance who suggested that? But I don't know, but I think they pointed the finger towards the military. Perhaps because they withdrew from that responsibility and just said, you guys do it. You're the last in the line. But if you look at the Ukrainian law, it tells you verbatim, Cabinet of Ministers and local authorities. That means that the head of the village, the city mayor, a governor of the region should be the ones taking it on themselves. And they should be talking to their society at large and discussing how to. And only then, when mobilized people come to the drafting point, that's where they meet the military. Nikolay, do you know what happens in Russia if you refuse to come to the mobilization point? Do you know if military chases you on the street? Well, we had a few messages early on in the war that they were doing it. Yeah, they indeed tried several different methods. Now it's very simple there. You just cannot pay a traffic fine if you're not on the list for military service. And then your accounts are blocked, the penalty grows because you cannot pay it. You cannot make certain purchases, but the border is not closed, you can leave the country. You cannot transfer from one job to another. So administratively, they limited their people. They cannot fulfill a bunch of civil actions that they should be able to fulfill otherwise, unless they get on the list with the drafting service. They had a few episodes when military was intervening. Now they're trying to get rid of it. Having tried many, they figured out that it's not a good story when military take upon themselves to capture civilians on the street to send to fight in the war, because that violates the trust of human society, of their society into the military, and their military should not be scaring their own citizens. In our country, we made that strategic mistake that military is scaring our citizens, and I would really be curious to see who are the authors of that law, of that process, because this is one of the crucial ways to dismantle our belief in our military, in our government, in our governance. Military should be giving happy mood when they're walking in the street, when they're just sitting drinking coffee. People should be smiling and sending them signs of support when they see them. But now they're just running away from them. This is undermining the pillar of our stability. What idiot adopted it this way? I'm really curious. And the first thing that we should do in this regard, we should stop the practice when our military are directly responsible for gathering the drafted people. They should be sitting in the mobilization points and awaiting happily for those that are being sent or come at their own volition. They should not be riding those buses and shoving people in them. You know, they're also allowed to search through people's belongings, through private persons' belongings. Why? I want to remind about a good book in the August of 1941, Moment of Truth. There, the counterintel is trying to capture enemy infiltrators who are causing a lot of damage to Soviet operations, and Stalin takes it under his own control, and they expend a lot of resources to try to capture a small group of 3 people. They expend thousands of military resources. They have to trace logistics for the dogs, the search dogs and all. They describe it in details in this book. And what's the culmination point? How do you find these infiltrators? Because they wear the uniform of your soldiers, they have the proper documents, and the main prosecutor of Red Army at the culmination point allows military to search other military belongings, personal belongings, temporarily in that specific area. And that is presented there in that literature as something very extraordinary, that the sky has been torn apart and now we have to make measures that are going against the Constitution and the law. As a temporary measure, they write in big letters, it is allowed to. And this is, remember, that crazy Stalin with scary gulag and dictatorship and everything. That measure in a small area, couple dozen square kilometers, is being described as extraordinary. Meanwhile, what do we have in the democratic Ukraine? Military already have the right to do a search of belongings of civilians. Police doesn't have that right without district attorney's document. Who is the author of that? How do the representatives of Mobilization Commission have this right? Who is that bright individual who allowed for that? Where is the investigative committee to research that and to find the ones guilty? I don't know, Alexei, definitely not me, who is an expert in this. You know, I have another question, Nikolay, you may help me with. Who is the guarantor of our constitution, according to our documents? Well, president, I think, right? Exactly. I would say that our president doesn't have the organ to help him to control the constitution, following the constitution, because otherwise 60% of laws taken in the recent times by our Congress would probably be cancelled. According to recent research, I think there was over 50% that the laws of our country are going in contradiction with our constitution. President of Ukraine is a guarantor, but they unfortunately do not have the enforcement apparatus to control that. And they don't really have direct tools to guarantee the constitution. President technically took it upon himself to guarantee it, right? I'm not even calling the last names of the president, just putting up as a president's figure. And here's our Congress bringing new laws that go directly against the Constitution. And their commission comes out and says that everything is fine and sound. And neither Dmitry Klubinets, who is the responsible person for the human rights there, nor any other ombudsman, they're screaming about this law. No, it takes upon one of the congresswomen and some private bloggers to bring people attention to it, right? So everything starts with the top. That's where you need to start cleaning the house from. So about the law on mobilization, there's also an initiative by Goncharenko, our other congressman, who suggested an alternative law. I don't know if you had a chance to read through it, but he thinks that the main element would be to diminish the term of service. He thinks that 36 months is too much, should be 18 months instead, and that's the main part of his project. So what do you think about that? Nikolay, I want to remind that Yulia Tymoshenko also wanted to address that matter, but I think they're approaching from the wrong angle. The key question, how long to serve, is determined by the number of troops we have and the number of tasks they have. If right now, and we already have some rumors going about that if we start bringing new recruits instead of the ones holding the line, we will probably not be able to hold the line. Because the old ones, exhausted as they are, they already have knowledge, they have experience. So they're holding those front lines in the current state. If you bring newbies there, they will take some time to get used. And the enemy, experienced enemy, would definitely know that would be a good point, a good moment to attack and to capture a few positions. Because it'll take likely the newbies some time to learn how to defend, how to wage war, how to do their duties under fire. And it will be really dependent upon how do we do it, whether we mix the new ones with the old, or if we make a stupid mistake of replacing the old units with completely new ones. And until we get this data, until we figure out that schedule, the discussions about rotation are useless. And perhaps our congressman suggesting these new additions to the law will probably, they might be aware, because you need to have access to certain discussions. They might be aware of certain processes, and that's why they're bringing. But it needs to be calculated for sure, because your thing is you may have access to that level of information, but you may not have necessarily gotten this access, because you need to not only have the level of access, you also need to have this document shared with you. So I'm not sure if these congressmen actually have seen their real data. If they have, that's a good thing. If they have not, that could be just populism. And one more thing, we can only train maybe, well, I wouldn't say the number, but we can train a certain amount of troops at the time, right? Because Russians, they can do maybe 130, 100 on their own side, 30 in Belarus, 100,000. So, and also that's when you keep in mind that their training facilities are not under attack. We managed to hit a couple closer to the border, but as a rule, they're not. And unfortunately, our training centers keep getting attacked, and we don't have enough air defense systems to cover them. And preparation of military specialists is a big, tough process, especially in huge quantities. I don't think our capacity is 100,000. I think it's several times less. If we take, hypothetically, 30,000, how long shall we be preparing those 500,000 that we wanted to draft? Our usual training is 3 to 4 months. Expedited training can be done faster, but it will be then prepared worse than our Russian counterparts that spent 3 to 4 months for training. And then these two armies will fight. What will be the outcome? So let's do the mathematics. 30,000, hypothetically again. Let's just make everybody use their heads. It's one of the main tasks that I'm pursuing with these streams. So 30,000, 3 to 4 months per group. Then over a year, we can prepare maybe 90,000 troops, maybe 100, perhaps another 40 overseas, abroad, right, in Poland, Britain, anywhere else. So that's how many we'll be able to provide to the front. How many more can we bring there with poor training? Shoot a couple clips, throw a couple grenades. Well, there are much more complex specialties besides infantry. Air defense, driver of the battle vehicle, targeting specialists, artillery specialists. I'm not even talking about radio electronic interference and Navy and other. So, my friends, we should be paying attention to these matters right now and asking questions and tolling that bell. How will it be done? And it's only the members of the Committee for the National Defense who have the exact data, whom we keep laughing at in our media. But these matters we need to be bringing up. So, a couple questions, Alexei. First question, why, for example, we could not relocate training centers, for example, to Kiev district, to the area that is better protected with air defense systems? Nikolay, do you understand what a training center is and how much does it cost? And how long does it take to create it? Because, yeah, you can exert a lot of money building those up. You can try to move some of them and try to provide aerial cover, but it's difficult. We are rather short-limited on the air defense systems. It's like that Trishkin jacket, however you squeeze it, spread it, it's never enough everywhere. And yeah, today, by the way, one of the training facilities was hit, and it was hit before. So today, even training is not a trivial task. And we do have several training facilities like in Cherkassk and other places, and are generally protected by air defense systems, but we're not protecting them 100%. We're protecting them to some slight degree. And that's why the idea to train our troops across the border appeared. Not because we love their training, sometimes they actually do not provide adequate training, but it's better than absolutely not trained. And how much training can they provide? 40,000 a year. We need 40 a month to rotate 500,000 during a year. Let's talk about that. Why don't we discuss it? Why we just go down to populist measures like service time, etc. Of course, it makes difference, but at first you need to calculate. You need to calculate what is the reality. Otherwise, this conversation doesn't hold water. So this is vain discussions. You need to have systemic approach to that matter. You need to have numbers. And after that, you can discuss rotation terms. There was also another news, Alexei, about Germany, that their training centers experienced some strange drone hanging above them, or it keeps flying over them. That also tells you about the condition of their training facilities and the condition of their air defense. Yeah, I'll tell you more. I'm not sure about right now, but at the beginning of the war, they actually had some drones hanging over their facilities that flew from across Russian and Belarus territory. And that scary NATO that is being used as a scarecrow wasn't doing anything with these drones or these intel drones. And why have they not done anything, Alexei? I think they're shitting themselves. They're just not ready for war and they don't want to start it. I would remind that Iran made over 100 hits on American bases in Iraq and Syria, on American soldiers, and America is still not responding, completely not responding. It's the first time in 230 years of American history that American soldiers being attacked and they are not responding. They understand that they will not be able to pull off this regional war of that scale in the election year. All the American presidents and generals, current and past, they're probably rather upset with this fact, because that never existed, that you can shoot Americans without any reprimand. And we're still waiting for a strong answer from Poland about the Russian missile that violated their airspace. The only thing we heard is that they'll provide stern reaction. Okay, still waiting for it. This week, The Telegraph made a publication that tired Zelensky looks too tired to achieve victory. And the article is not so much about Zelensky, I would put the accents there properly, as it touches on the following thesis, that the author writes, when I was in Kiev last time, among certain political leaders, they were discussing the idea of a peaceful agreement where Russia would have taken NATO membership of Ukraine, in return that Ukraine would not try to liberate the occupied territories. And these conversations might be just rumors, but this is definitely fuel for Biden and the other politicians who want some kind of agreement with Russia. Do you think it's based in reality that they want that peace agreement? And this is what you can unite with facts that the West is not supporting us with arms and being too slow. Is it because they want us to sign peace treaty? Okay, Nikolay, the one who understands that will understand everything. I've already spoon-fed that, but let me give the whole picture again. The cost of Ukraine joining EU and NATO is a big war with Russia. We are paying this price now. The price for EU and NATO for adopting Ukraine is also a big war with Russia, and they are not ready to pay this price, and they will never be ready. They will not be fighting for Ukraine with Russia. That question is decided. There'll be a lot of conversations and discussions, and Stoltenberg and European bureaucracy will be discussing and explaining why they're existing. And they'll be talking about why they need expansion. That's their KPI. That's the reasons to give them rewards and say that they're doing their work fine and fulfilling their mission. There'll be a lot of conversations. There'll not be an adoption. Russia made a direct statement that it is ready to fight with them for this. We can laugh however much we want. I'm reading chat for our video. A woman is writing there, Alexei, I'm Russian. You don't know anything about Russia, and you don't know how they zombify and prepare mobilized. That's why they blow themselves up with grenades. Dear lady who is writing to us, the ability to prepare troops like that is the sign of battle worthiness and battle readiness of the government of the country. Do you think the fact that they're not listening to Plato and Socrates and liberalism lectures and not reading John Locke works and Keynes publications in the training centers, do you think is bad? No, it doesn't matter. Their task is to zombify their recruits and send them so they can attack effectively. That's what they're doing. Their zombified recruits cause a lot of damage for us. Their pilots are zombified just as well. And these zombies, by the way, broke our political course. They captured 20% of our territory. They killed a lot of civilians, and they're waging a war with very unclear perspectives for us, and the whole NATO and the EU are afraid of them. I can sympathize with you that you're in Russia, but I think I can argue that I do understand the benefits of the training they provide to their fighters. All right, Alexei, there was one more thing I wanted to ask of you. They're writing in the same article that since elections in this year are not likely to happen in Ukraine, Zelensky would be wise to form a government of national unity to prevent internal pressure from rising that will likely weaken Ukraine military capacity on the front. And it would make sense if Zelensky also would clarify the strategic vision for the country. So we did discuss the government of unity. You commented that a lot of times at length, and we understand already that no, it's not going to happen. But the question still remains about that last line, that Zelensky needs to set and formulate strategic vision for its country. Simple question, right? Do you think Zelensky can formulate such a strategic vision? If he can, Nikolay, he should. So far, our official doctrine says to the borders of 1991. And without blinking, we are discussing what we're going to do with the occupied Crimea. That is still pretty far from achieving. And both of them, borders of 91 and Crimea liberation, they're not at hand yet. So once again, why it is important to speak the truth on the government level? A very important thing is happening now. If somebody in Ukraine comes out now and says, we are losing this war, somebody from the government, what will happen? He'll probably be accused of treason, Alexei, right? Yeah, exactly. A lot of military are saying that. A very highly respected military who allow themselves to say that. And they're always being attacked and mixed with mud. Now imagine President to come out and say, we are losing this war. He'll be torn to pieces because people are afraid to hear the truth. And that is why they're losing this war. What if the society was ready to take this thought, to understand what will happen if we lose this war? That means we need then to understand the level of our loss, liberate a lot of resources to make sure that we can win in the next round or find a way to win in this one. But as long as we run away from an issue, as long as we're not acknowledging that we are losing this round, it's not going to happen tomorrow or half a year. Everything is slow. Russia has a limit of effectivity. A lot of things may happen, but in general, the trend is that we are less effective than our enemy. On this track, right, on this stage, somewhat short. Well, not exactly short, Nikolay. It lasts for about a year and a half already, and it likely will continue lasting for a bit more. So losing, I mean, not in the way that we'll lose this war, but in that in the current stage, we are on a losing trend. So when we acknowledge that, our social economic climate will change. We will liberate a lot of resources that we're expending as if we're not losing it, right? All those stadiums within 20 kilometers from the border in the area of their potential invasion, again, for 600 million hryvnias. So all these resources then can be redirected to making sure we do not lose next round. We prepare right for it. But who will be brave enough to say that, besides Arestovych and a couple more people? So our society is full of lies, and it's also not capable of telling truth to itself, looking in its own eyes. And these societies, they usually lose. Everything is rather simple. People who cut the feedback. This is the main thing you need. The main thing in the world is feedback. All the biological systems depend on feedback. The better your feedback, the better the organism functions. People who prohibit to say the truth, who marginalize those who say that, they are doing everything to lose in this war. It's their own work. There are nobody coming from Mars. Zelensky didn't come from Mars. Those funny people who write to us in the chat that we are here on the stream should be rewarded with Putin medals. No, you guys are doing everything to lose in this war by refusing to look the truth in the eyes. And this is the cycle of our propaganda that became the part of motivational mechanisms. Motivational mechanisms affect political ratings, and behind that political rating is the whole country that is going to suffer because we're supporting that instead of looking at the truth. And the moment when we start saying that we're losing and it's not about ratings anymore, then it will be a change of state and society through tears, through search for responsible. Then at least we get a chance to change the strategy and win. But for now, if we're fighting with a lunch break, with supposedly the lethal, deadly enemy, we'll lose if we continue fighting on that trend. Russia is a much more resource-rich country, and they're fighting as if it is a question of life and death for them. And we are not doing it. And we're looking at duality, about cutting off the feedback, about persecution of those who bring the truth up. This is your current Ukrainian society. And the treatment, the medication has to be very strong. When people are saying, this is not society, this is Zelensky regime, I always ask back, where did Zelensky regime come from? Beautiful people gave birth to that regime, or they invaded from Mars and they treacherously crept from, I don't know, someplace to win the elections here? Indeed, Alexei. And then they create tenders for their own products and the Ministry of Defense, and then wear Ukrainian national shirts, right? Right. So these norms that we've been fighting for apparently recently that finally surfaced that normally in a normal state would probably be staying in the margins of 3 and 5%. But in our country now you can be crazed patriot gathering millions. But the proposition from that patriots group is go die for me at the front and I'll go get richer. So what I see here also is that they are saying roughly the following. I'm trying to formulate it to make it, to digest it to a simpler formula. You, and I'm really navigating between using the cuss words here. Oh, come on, you can speak up loud here. No. I need to be, not that I care about calling them names, but I want to be very precise. They're saying, guys, we have people of different sorts in Ukraine, of different grades. And remember that proposition to mobilize those who can pay at least 6,000 in taxes. They killed that, they nixed that addendum to the law because they figured out that this is already discrimination on monetary value. And you cannot win this war this way. It'll cause societal issues. But everywhere we observe attempts to separate us into different grades: faith, language, politics. The country that is being separated like this, can it win? No. I agree with you. Right. So we may not lose necessarily to the bitter end, but I don't see how we can win as a split country. And now all these laws about mobilization, they'll still have an element that would allow the rich ones to run away from it, to evade conscription. So these people made two interesting things. One of them is that whenever you see a bureaucrat or a businessman in Ukrainian shirt and dressed nationally, it usually indicates that he had stolen something today, right? Or purchased a hotel in Croatia, exactly. So these people that are making Ukrainian language as a political project instead of making it a cultural project, people would accept additional cultural project in Ukraine. right? Because it emphasizes our rich, beautiful history that many people don't even know. Our language is closest to the language of the ancient Rus, ancient Russia. So that would be a different story. But they brought it up as a political project. And in this political project, if you do not speak Ukrainian, you are automatically a second-grade person, a second-grade citizen, and now go and die for that second grade. And this is the proposal that this law voices for the Russian-speaking citizens of Ukraine. Does it help to increase the patriotism or desire to go and fight and die in this war? So these proponents of Ukrainization of language, like a total, absolute Ukrainian, you know what now you expect when somebody turns to you in Ukrainian, people very often in social media or out in the street, if somebody calls you up like that, what do you expect? You expect if there is an attack coming from them, right? Exactly, that's what I mean. So there are still a lot of people who use Ukrainian as a cultural project, right? But very often there is definitely a subtone and undertone whenever somebody starts addressing you in Ukrainian on the political spectrum. And just in 2 years, these people who created that political project that doesn't allow to say truth, that doesn't allow to criticize the government and to say that, hey, let's do something productive. These people would not have been otherwise being politically capable and got enough political capital. It's only war that created social figures out of them. So these people already problematized Ukrainian language. When you hear that and hear that attack, you start thinking, is that one of those idiots? Second, they problematizing our cultural dress, our traditional dress, and they keep trying to divide people into different grades. And if you read detail of that war, of that mobilization law, you will find more discrimination in there. And that's what people would not fight for. And don't mix pseudo-societal layers that were created around this war with their pluses and minuses, with the collective opinion of Ukrainians. And I talk to people, I talk to these guys, and I keep pushing them to understand and recognize that you guys are not all Ukrainians with these views. You're just part of it. You're like Zaporozhye Special Cossack detachment, but they at least acknowledge that they're not all Ukrainians. So instead of separating all that, you acknowledge who you are and start building bridges between you and the other groups, while instead you're just demanding special privilege, special position, and your main right is to attack others, to detest others, to trample on them, to pull them and tell them how they must live, how they should not live, and then demand them to do what? To join your army and go die for that system that is despising them. And I can pose the question wider. 32 years of Ukraine's independence. When we started our independence path, how many people did we have? 53 million, right? How many today? Near 30. Well, I think 26, probably 27, but right. We dwindled in half. Do you think people will go and fight for the system that cut the population in half in 30 years? System like that greedy creature eating its own people. But the main resource that Ukraine has is its people. The main slogan should have been not Ukraine above all, but Ukrainians above all. And until we change one for the other, nothing will happen. People will not be dying for the system that has a layer of society that defines who is a Ukrainian and who is not Ukrainian and who is a different grade Ukrainian. And those people who captured the power in that country, they would have issues trying to convince the rest to fight for them. And the only reason why we still have people fighting on the front is because they have direct motivation. People have direct motivation to fight on the front. This is the category of people who do not want to go and join the army, but if they get a writ, if they get a note that they need to come join and go to the conscription point, they go. They're fighting for other reasons, for their life, for the right to define their life, to live how they want to. And all that patriotic drum orchestra doesn't really affect them. They're fighting for something else. They're fighting for their real values. But even these things are not being included into this conscription law. The current ruling class cannot even calculate the real motivation, that things that motivate and demotivate people to go fight, and perhaps increase the first and decrease the latter. And this law is very detached from real problematics and real motivation of Ukrainian people. And one group of our leaders thinks that they caught God by the beard and they can do whatever now. They unfortunately are failing to understand the real processes in the society. And the numbers about the training facilities and how much can we train there, these are just numbers. That's a secondary layer to the first problem. So, speaking of motivation, one of the congressmen, Chernya, also communicated about the same thing that you're trying to send a message here on. And you just said that these people still do not understand what motivation is needed to be inserted into this document. Let's expand on these motivations. Motivation should be very simple. The soldier needs to understand that he is in the center. He is the center of attention. That first, if he is conscribed, he will be able to participate in his military destiny. Not fully, but he'll be able at least to choose military specialty, choose the brigade, or at least participate. And he'll be seriously asked, after having done the tests and all, about his preferences. So he can probably join his relatives and friends. And that's an interest of the army, because then you have better camaraderie between the soldiers. It's actually good to have relatives and friends in the same detachment. They fight better. Second, they'll get better quality training. The law needs to make sure that we indeed have training, and also additional training in the front. The simplest answer for failing to prepare your troops before they get to the front was invented a while ago during the First World War. They had field schools with divisions and detachments, because still every division and detachment, they're standing in several rows on the front, and they always have the back area where you can prepare your new recruits and train them in your traditions, in your tasks, in your style of fighting, and to fulfill the tasks. So unless the enemy breaks through and you need to throw them to patch the breach in the front, you would have enough time to train them in the close proximity to the front line. But still, the law would need to outline that person is the main value, that human is the main value of our system, and the system needs to be human-centric. And that whenever they need to get paid, they will get paid, right? That would also motivate people. And there is one glaring problem here in Ukraine. Here we have good payments for deceased, for the family of deceased, the ones who died on the front. 15 million hryvnias, that affords the family to stay afloat, to pay their bills, and to maybe even, if they're wisely spending this money, to maybe raise a bit in the societal level. But first, good luck getting it first. It's not so simple. And the procedure needs to be simplified, because government cannot suffer defeat in that area. It's better for government to spend more money than to torture the relatives. Now, the other part of that is the ones who are missing in action. We have over 10,000 of those. This is 10,000 families who will never get the payments, having in reality lost their breadwinners, because idiotic system that doesn't allow to pay money for the missing in action, it breaks any belief in the society, not even in the right things in law, but sometimes even in existence of God. Because imagine your mom with 2 kids, your husband went to war and got missing in action, and then you are bringing up these 2 kids and you have no support. Because what does it push it to the widow? She's thinking it would be better if he just died instead of gone missing, right? Horrible thoughts. And We do have some benefits for the ones who deceased, but we have nothing for those who are missing. So why government would not be paying the same amount of money, maybe in equal portions, over, I don't know, 15 years or something? And if the person comes back from captivity, if he was in prison on the Russian side, then perhaps, stop these payments and say, thankfully, that person is alive. Why they're not doing it? This is one of the best litmus tests to see the system of motivation and what is at the forefront, what is the main value for the country when they pick people from the street and send them to fight in this war. Second, when this person comes back from war, there's got to be a system of rehabilitation, including psychological. There's got to be some benefits for the members of the family, wife, children, immediate relatives. Simple things, from free transportation to perhaps resort treatment and some recovery and PTSD treatment, however much the government can afford to pay for. And also, eventually, when we figure out how to rotate them, they need to know that regardless of what is happening on the front, even if the front is almost crumbling, they will find reserves in the other part, but he will be let go. He'll be rotated, he'll get home, he will have a chance to rest with family, to maybe travel abroad, and he will not be drafted again sooner than a year maybe, or half a year, because the war might last for a long time. And that the person can restore his profession, specialty, adapt to the civilian life, get a few days of vacation. And we need to help them to change the profession, right? Perhaps give them month or months. Because after war, if you come back and if you spent a prolonged time there, maybe your profession is already disappearing, right? And you cannot really afford to work it because you won't be paid enough. So they need to know that after return from the war, they will not be stuck sitting on the sofa and drinking beer or whatever. That they will have a proper system waiting for them to get retrained, to get different specialty if needed. And also, having fought for this country, having fought in the front, his family, his kids, his immediate relatives will have certain privileges as the family that dedicated one of their members to fight for this country. That's when in the kindergarten, they'll be saying that Johnny's father is an engineer, this is great, but Peter's dad is a soldier who was fighting in the war. So let's applaud Pete and his family. Of course, you'll not be given better grades at PE for that, but everybody would need to know and make sure that we speak about that his dad is a hero, and that if he misbehaves, he, by the way, puts shame on the hero. So if that system works, we will understand, our society will understand that, yes, the person is going to a difficult mission. Perhaps he will or she will die there, but their families will benefit from their sacrifice. And they're doing that sacrifice so that people could work, they could enjoy restaurants, drink coffee, Arestovych could still talk on TV. And even those who are not really eager to fight the war, they would be persuaded to go fight, because then the whole country is human-centric. Because then they're not chasing you to throw there and then throw you away when you're done. That's when the country will actually applaud to our military. That will when it will start working. This is what is important, I think. I'm not even talking about the military layer of society, military caste, right? So when the system becomes human-centric, not mobilization effort-centric, not when people will be counted by simple numbers without having a person behind it, when the person's destiny will be and their probable life and death will be in the focus of that system, then we will not be hunting them under the sofas and discuss the possible mobilization of women. Everything was already invented. Military history has examples of it. This just needs to be done. And we don't need to then scream and try to attack soldiers that they're not speaking all Ukrainian, that they're not wearing some Ukrainian insignia on their civilian shirt, and so if you're a military, who cares about your family, right? Imagine the psychological pressure on the family when their dad or nephew or cousin or somebody or uncle went missing in action. You have a neighbor, for example, who had a person who was killed in war. They go to the cemetery, they have their flag there, they have the payments, they have some benefits, and your family is forgotten. That walks on through the heads and through the minds of different people. One family would have 15 million, so they can still cope. Another family with missing in action, they neither have their dead nor have any money. And for me, the criteria would be when we start thinking about the destiny of those who went missing in action. Until then, I'm not believing in any mobilization. And if there'll be any positive sides, of course, we'll denote them. But until that important element changes, I am not believing that we are making ourselves human-centric. I think this is a very important speech, Alexei, and I would suspect it probably will be cut and copied in different streams. So let them grab this one as well. Look, there's probably another good time to remind everybody that every stream we are supporting fundraisers for individual troops that turn to us with these demands and asks. And we verify that indeed these are real troops, and we usually post fundraisers under our streams. So this one has the same. Under the stream, you'll find a link to the 93rd Brigade. They're collecting funds for Mavic drones, Mavic 3T. We helped them earlier with optical sites, and we send the money. They are sending their regards, so now they're coming again with the ask about the drones. They need those UAVs to fight the war. Please do not forget that and support Ukrainian armed forces. This is supremely important. There is nothing more important. Right, they're fighting for us on a difficult side of the front, difficult part of it, and the drones allow them to achieve their tasks, but it's also a very quickly disappearing commodity on the battlefront. So yeah, that's why we have a lot of asks for the drones. So I want to also touch upon the publication from the Telegraph. I think it needs some commentary from you as well. It is not enough for the West to understand that Ukrainians are fighting not only for them, for their own country, but also for Europe. This is, of course, truth, but there are no signs that the President of the United States or leaders of Western Europe really believe that. If they did, they would have done already everything they could to hold Putin and to supply a huge amount of weapons for Ukraine, everything they need in order to win over Russia in this aggressive war. So the question, if they believed, they would have done that. Do you think this construct is hypocritical, knowing that what you already touched upon? Right. It is, first of all, wrong to ask the leaders to believe, right? We're talking about calculating first, because otherwise the West is rather hypocritical, more hypocritical than us, I guess, if you look at from it this way, because they announced everything to be the axis of evil, but it's Ukrainians and Israelites and maybe South Korea will have to fight for them, right? There are also some artillery incidents on the border there. So if you announce that this is an axis of evil, then either go fight against it or don't use this rhetoric. And the other question is that even if they wanted to fight that, they just have nothing. They have wasted down the toilet for 30 years, Europe did, their military production. And now you want them to restore it in a couple of years? The whole social political system of the West stands on the system of financial speculations and not on the real production. And military production definitely suffered. That's why, even though they throw tens of billions of dollars into their military production companies, unfortunately, it really results only in capitalizing of their shares, but doesn't affect much their rate of production. So, yeah, what did Biden say in March of 21 before the first accumulation of Russian troops on the Ukrainian border? He said the world's separated. Democracies are fighting against dictatorships. Everybody said, yes, hooray. Ukraine said, hooray, and maybe the West will not forget us. And since what? Since that, nothing happened, right? And now we keep asking questions. Where are the Patriot missiles? Because we're running out. North Korean ballistic missiles are most likely already here. Iranian are expected in spring. They're still en route, right? But it's still being discussed that they are sending them. And Americans are saying, well, ATACMS will probably just destroy and dismantle. Germans saying, no, it's not the time of Tauruses yet. And Americans are saying, well, we also don't have enough Patriot missiles for the Patriot systems to shoot enemy's missiles down. And yeah, we're making them, but not enough. And we need to give them to everybody. And we also need to support Israel and others. And we are just setting up the production. So maybe in the end of 25, we'll have enough. So these are all not good signs, right? This is definite hypocrisy. So, Alexei, why did you say that most likely North Korean missiles are already used by Russia against Ukraine? Well, because they first announced that those missiles were used on Kharkov, and then they pedaled back and said that no, they were not the North Koreans. That's why I'm suspecting they're likely already in possession. I'm not using any secret data that I may have. I'm not just using the ones in the open media. So yeah, that was a piece of news that Russia used North Korean missile to hit Kharkov, right? So if they did, then where is the Patriot system? Missiles, right? Raytheon signed an agreement of intentions with Germany, guys. If you'll be so slow with that tempo, you'll have North Korean landing in Germany before you actually react to anything. So I wanted to ask you, Alexei, is it important to articulate mobilization in Europe itself? That in reality, guys, you should start thinking about mobilizing your own armies and start thinking about martial law and your resources. Right. I think our stream is partly affecting that. So how do they react, Alexei? The smart ones are saying that, yeah, we are definitely on the losing vector of this one, right? In America, you can see the exchange of statements between Biden and Trump. They went finally to direct accusations of each other. And they already have broken another staple of American society, the use of court against your political opponents. And now they're attacking both. They're attacking Trump and Biden, both sides. And, in America, they had a tradition, in quotes, of maybe assassinating some presidents who were really at odds with their enemies. But they have never went to war and to court against each other like that. So we'll see what will happen there, if they'll be capable to support us a year from now. Europe, Italy specifically, started saying that we needed to talk about changing the EU as a proper country with a president and not the head of European Commission. Because the paradigm of the end of history that the collective West lived in, I don't know how they train these elites these days. The old elites in Europe, they knew they were trained in proper history. But they need to understand there is no property without power. European Union allowed themselves to be very rich, very fat, and very ill-equipped. Everybody like that ends pretty badly. And from all sides, they saw the signs, the war in Yugoslavia, their loss in Afghanistan and Iraq, migrant attacks and all that. There are all signs coming from different directions, telling that if you will not be armed, you might be eaten. And only now, some countries like Forza Italy appeal now that, hey, we need to get our stuff together. And they're more on the right. Melanie was the prime minister ahead of that. So they understand that. And that's what they were discussing. They're talking about demography, about the preparedness for conflict, and they're calling upon creation of a proper European army, Italians. But I'm not seeing much traction, not Germans. And I have a very definite sign that I use that something started to change or not. When people start publicly talking about fundamental questions, when in Europe they start talking about that, that's a sign of recovery. When in States they talk about that, that's the sign of recovery, right? Europe, you cannot be fat, tasty, nice smelling, rich, and not being able to defend all that. There's no property without power. So They destroyed their own army, their own industrial complex, and now they start to consider that they finally need to start rebuilding it somewhat, right? Baltic countries are usually very active in this regard, and they understand that they're not, with all respect to Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians, they're unfortunately not independent as resources go. They don't have military independence fully, they don't have resource independence. They have very big dependence on the Europe. If both blocs, European Union and NATO, will not be able to protect them, they will suffer greatly. So that's why they are tolling all the bells. But the Germany and France, they discuss, yeah, we need to speed it up maybe, but still, let's make a city park in that zone instead of increasing the production. The story that we discussed from last week. One said, let's increase military production, and the other said, no, we'll have a city park in that area. Indeed, Alexei, yes. So the story of this week is actually an Italian story, that their navy has only 63 missiles left. And that's what Guido Rossetto mentioned a few days ago during the Defense Commission meeting. He mentioned this number that surprised all present. And they're writing, they're describing it, that his words were followed by expression of a concerned acceptance. And I'm surprised how they're describing all that. So that was brought to light after the discussion about Hussites in Yemen, when the American military shot several of the UAVs and dropped a few missiles on the Hussites, and Americans launched about 80 missiles, while Italians discussed that they total have about 63. So that data that's spilling into the public, do you think it's a sign of Italy getting a bit healthier? Well, the ruling party, Forza d'Italia, they demonstrate the right force, the right posture in regards to that question. But how many are there like them? And these are the rights that actually still for NATO, for EU, right? And there are many rights that are right parties in different countries that are not for that unity, right? 63 missiles. Let me just speak with a calculator, right? Funny Russians launch 100 missiles in one volley. It takes them a while to make it, but once they do, they send 100 and we shoot them all down. America manufactures 500 Patriot missiles a year. They can transfer to 1,000 missiles per year only by 2026. That's at least 2 more years of Russian volleys at 100 missiles per volley. But Italian fleet will come and help us, right? And they have 63 missiles that they can shoot. British fleet cannot recruit enough teams to run their Navy ships. And Germans are saying, after a lot of effort, we finally started the production of 120 millimeter shells for our own tanks, but there is a nuance that our tanks keep breaking. And Baltic countries recently criticized that and said that their last tank modification is a parade vehicle. It's not for real war. And European howitzers are beautiful, mighty, and very precise, but they cannot stand the tempo of the war in Ukraine. And the main thing, it's not even production, it's the Anthropotype that is different now. The West is not the people that we used to think about they were. The paradox of Ukrainian dream is that people who have never been in the West or maybe visited it as tourists, they do want to be part of that West. If they had to deal with the real West, they probably would have lost all the illusions. And the main thing, they probably would have stopped asking the West to wake up, because I don't think they'll wake up in our interest. I think the person was and has visited the West. I have a simple criteria. When you spend at least an hour talking to a structure like Rand Corporation, if you did not have that conversation in depth, you probably have visited, but you haven't really been and understood them. You might have even taken part in some forum or conference, but since you haven't had this conversation, you don't understand what do they think about, what do they plan, and what their motives are. Here, everybody wants to go join the West, which, first of all, to a large degree provoked this war, second, didn't show up to this war, and the third is not even going to fight it or destroy any of the participants. And until you realize that, All these hopes will only sink you because faulty illusions sink. The reality is very different. It is not what majority of people imagined based on the propaganda and what they keep insisting on. The reality is very different. First, as I mentioned, West is not ready for war morally and psychologically. Second, they're not ready for war materially. Separate individual transfers by 200 missiles or 400 tanks, they do not change the situation at large. And I want to, again, I don't know how to reach the audience again, but listen, just listen to it. The official doctrine of Biden's administration is to not let this war spill beyond the borders of Ukraine. This is their doctrine. This is how they fight this war. And here you are saying Ukraine should join NATO. Ukraine in NATO is expansion of this war. It goes against the doctrine. Pistorius, Minister of Defense of Germany, who is very complimentary to Ukraine, who treats us with support, he did mention out in the open that you are not allies. We do help you, but you are not allies. And our internal bloggers in Ukraine, they continue calling them allies. They're not allies. Allies are the ones with whom you have contract about military union. We do not have such contract. Friends, just understand that. Understand where we are. And don't ask me about the recipes, how to get out, before asking about it, even though I have a few ways out that I can see. We first need to understand where we are now. It starts with vision. It starts with understanding our exact position, and that's where the recipes will stem from. Because it's too early to discuss that until you actually see the reality. And no insight needs to be brought here, no special data. You just need to open your eyes and to see what the West is saying about themselves and what they're telling us. The war should not spill beyond the borders of Ukraine. There go your dreams about NATO and EU. Ukraine is a country at war. Us joining EU and NATO brings it over to those organizations, and that's against their initial goal and what they keep stating. Yeah, I understand that, Alexei, thank you. I have a question, Nikolay. Let's play our favorite game. Whatever we speak here, public at large starts to discuss about 3 months later. So if, let's say, in July this year, there'll be some clashes on the streets of the United States, and there'll be some very active elements of that election campaign, just like BLM protests were a couple of years ago. And they will get busy with solving their internal issues and will be too busy to respond to outer world asks. What then for Ukraine? Patriots, compatriots, friends, I'm just as a Ukrainian as you are. What then we do? Germany cannot produce shells for their own tanks and spare parts. United States are busy at home. What then we do? We do not have a plan B, said Dmitry Kuleba, our foreign affairs minister. He did say recently that they will help us anyway, and if they don't, we don't have plan B. Exactly. So that once again outlines that we do not have scenario planning school in Ukraine. Scenario planning apparently is an enemy technology, and everybody who's using that is probably a Russian spy. And everybody who brings that tool to the set should be called a traitor. And we usually have a plan. Our plan sounds like this. We as a blind moose running through the burning forest, the destiny is guiding us, but if we happen to smash our head in the wall and lose our antlers, what is our plan? We do not have plan B. We just lie there and die. That's it. We don't have other options. The West will help us, absolutely. Why? They can't help themselves. Yeah, the strong abroad will help us. Let me remind you a biblical story. Remember in Old Testament, there was Judea and Israel, two kingdoms, and there was Syrians as a threat coming to their borders. And one of the czars says that Egypt will help us. They have better catapults, they have better swords. And the other kingdom said, no, we'll rely on ourselves and we'll fight. So one of the kingdoms was destroyed, the one that was hoping for Egypt, and the other, who was self-reliant, remained. And I would call both problems that we have here in Ukraine, one of them is attempt to give particular for the whole when the opinions of 20% of our population are being given out and presented as the opinion and story of the whole country. It is wrong, and I don't understand why we're doing it. They speak Ukrainian, we can speak Ukrainian. They served in the military, I served in the military. What other privileges and distinctions they have, right? And by the way, those 4.5 million men who avoid getting on the list for the draft, they have their own opinion too, as well as women who took their kids and left the country. They have their opinion too, and they have full rights to those opinions, by the way. They're citizens of Ukraine. And we can argue about what kind of Ukraine do we need and who has more rights to that. And the second one is that we keep relying on Egypt. What's his name? Gogol wrote about that pretty well. What did he write? He said that, yeah, the famous quote, did the polls help you, Sonny? Let me read you a fundamental text for Ukraine. I did bring it thinking that it probably would be applicable. When we understand it, I think things will be in place, if our society can understand it. I will read an excerpt, and you might be able to recognize and tell me where that comes from. I want to tell you, friends, what is our camaraderie? You heard from fathers and grandfathers how honorable was our land. Greeks knew about us. We took the Tsar city, and we took their territories sometimes, and they respected us. But the foes took all that. Everything is gone. Now only us are left here, sad as the widow after learning of her husband's death. And our land is just as sad. And this is the time when we raised our hand against our camaraderie. There are no holier links than comradeship. Father loves the kid, mother loves the kid, they love each other. But it's not that. Animals love their cubs as well. But to become relative because of the soul likeness, only a human can do. We had friends across the border, but none of them like the ones here. I used to spend time there, and you know people, you talk, and you eventually become friends. But when it comes to sharing, the heart aches. They're different. They're smart, but they're different. They're similar, but they're different. I don't think anyone can love in the same fashion as the Russian soul. I know there's a lot of treachery in our land who only think about bread, money, and horses and wine. They take all kind of habits from across the border. They don't want to speak their own language. They sell each other as soulless animals on the market. But even the last of those treacherous ones, he still has at least a modicum of Russian soul, and one day he will awaken, will fall on the floor, and will condemn his treacherous life, and he will be ready to atone and suffer punishment for the mistake of his life. And let them know what is a camaraderie on Russian land. And if it comes to dying, none of them will be able to die like that. They will never collect enough of their mousy nature. And this is not somebody random writing it. It's not Moscow Patriarch, not Zhukov, not Stalin. It's Taras Bulba, our national hero, speaking about the military camaraderie. I understand for Ukrainians to hear Russian, it's difficult, but just replace that with, instead of Russian, we'll replace it with Rus. And that is the historic name that we had. In Galichunia, in history documents and religious documents, this is what we're called. And what he's saying, we're selling each other as soulless animals. We're staying away from our language, right? Ukrainian language, and Russian language too, actually, in Ukraine now. And that we're taking all kind of foreign habits. And here we are running to the foreigners to try to get into their ways. And used to be known Russian knyaz and rulers who were signing contracts with Constantinople. And the biggest, strongest country of those times were not signing treaties with some barbarians whom they didn't know, who were just Christianed later. Barbarians do not bring a fleet worth of 2,000 ships. So until we understand and honor things that Gogol outlines in Taras Bulba's speech, I don't think we can win. And he outlines all these things. Don't rely on the others. Be self-reliant. Help each other. And until we remember who we are and what is it for, nothing will change for the better. The run of the Ukrainian elite to the West, this is like hopes for Egypt. This is our big eternal sickness here in Ukraine. And yes, as I mentioned, we continue giving private for the whole. We're much bigger than the ideology of maybe at best 20% of Ukraine, 30% of Ukraine. And to make the rest 80% to suffer and to fight for that ideology, which perhaps that ideology has a right to live, but it should not be a guiding star for the majority of the country. And those 4 million people who are avoiding conscription, they're much heavier weight than all your slogans, wearing Ukrainian shirts and at the same time using these shirts to wash the floors with the organizations who can give you money. You can say a lot of things about Zelensky and to critique him, right? But he has at least one very strong feature. He is stubborn. When he talks to the West, he is indeed stubborn. He is definitely not a Sarosite, and he is not washing their floors with his shirt, like these others who will be eager to sell their mother and father and land and faith for a grant, and who are trying to tell us, everybody here in Ukraine, that this is what Ukraine is. Alexei, I think this is a good conclusion for this stream. I didn't even want to spoil it with any other information pieces that we have not discussed, but we will traditionally move them to the next stream, if they'll be still worthy of discussion. Thank you, Alexei Nikolaevich, for your presence in that stream. Please do not forget to support Armed Forces of Ukraine. Below this video, there's a link to the fundraiser for the 93rd Brigade. It is their direct fundraiser, so if you can, please donate. Thank you, Alexei Arestovych, and do not forget to subscribe to his channel, to Alpha Media, and of course to Privateer Station if you are listening or watching that in English language. Good luck.